Hello, Tributes, and welcome to Episode 5 of Ashes of the Hunger Games. Before I start, I'd like to thank Andrew McLean for making some of the art used in this video. I'd also like to thank Christian Blanco and Lauren for writing Tales of the Hunger Games and Pen and Reborn, respectively. I'd also like to state that, that I will be having music in the background of this video as sort of a test go. If the music ends up getting copyright claimed, then I'm gonna have to delete the video, re-record the entire thing, and then it's gonna be a bit. It's gonna be a bit, but I'm gonna have to do a bit. But I did be sure to look up copyright-free songs. I did look up copyright-free songs and royalty-free songs. So, if any of them are, if this video is copyrighted, then I know that there were some liars in these copyright-free songs. But anyways, with all that being said, good luck, Tributes, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Oh my goodness, it's loading. In accordance with the Treaty of the Reclamation, every 5 years a special set of rules would be incorporated into the Hunger Games, and a special set of games known as a Quinquennial Quell. These games were used to remind the districts of the capital's continuous command over them. On July 3rd, President Pontus Vesta made a live announcement on Capitol TV, in which he announced the conditions for the 22nd Quinquennial Quell, which would take place over the coming week. Vesta stated that in order to remind the rebels of the people who led their actions during the Dark Days, tributes will be reaped from the descendants of the leaders of the First Rebellion. President Vesta also added that there would be no volunteering this year. He then finally stated that the 3-for-4 rule would not be in place this year. After a long first day of reapings, Abutalon arrived in District 8. Before the reapings, he had a quick dinner with the mayor of the district, her family, 71-year-old Kate Jacquard, and 75-year-old Scarlett Ferile. Before they exited the town hall to witness the massive youths get into their reaping enclosures. Kit and Scarlett took their seats on the stage by the mayor, while Abutalon walked over to the female reaping bowl. As Abutalon had been going through the outer districts, even the newly inducted careers of Districts 10 and 12 had many tributes to choose from. Before picking out the female name, Abutalon gave a brief speech about the importance of the Quell and the bravery that tributes would show, before reaching into the female reaping bowl and picking out a piece of paper. It was soon revealed that the name of 17-year-old Rhea Burjack had been chosen. Rhea didn't immediately hear her name. One of her close friends actually had to use sign language to communicate to her that she had been chosen in a scene quite reminiscent of the female reapings of District 3 for the 176th Hunger Games. Instead of being 100% deaf, however, Rhea was only deaf in one ear, still managing to make it hard for her to hear sometimes. When Rhea finally realized she had been picked, she sighed. Her lots of greats-grandma led rebellions in District 8 many years before even the first Hunger Games. Rhea didn't understand why this Quell twist was occurring so many years after the first rebellion, but she couldn't change it now. Rhea stepped out into the aisle and looked around at everyone. She knew no one could volunteer, but for some reason she wished someone would be a rule breaker like their relatives and volunteer anyways. When she got onto the stage, she glared at Abutalon. She didn't know why she was acting like she was mad at Abutalon specifically. She was just mad and had no idea who to blame for her situation. Rhea did eventually shake Abutalon's hand, though, still glaring at him, though. She then took her spot against the wall behind Abutalon. Abutalon then walked over to the male reaping bowl. He looked out at the males in the crowd. They all looked so young compared to the girls. He honestly felt really bad for the boys. Abutalon just sighed and reached into the male reaping bowl. He swirled his hand around in the bowl for a few seconds before picking out a piece of paper. It was then revealed that the name of 13-year-old Jonathan Aramov was picked. When Jonathan heard his name, he screamed and burst into tears. Abutalon tried not to cry, seeing that the boy who was picked had a little thing called Down syndrome, much like Abutalon's own little sister Amaya, who was picked to be the female tribute for District 11. Eventually, Jonathan was forced out into the aisle by peacekeepers. As he walked down the aisle, he continued to cry. Jonathan screamed that he didn't want to go, and he begged the peacekeepers to let him go, which made everyone feel bad for the boy. When Jonathan got to the staircase, he didn't move, just continued to cry. Abutalon then stepped down from the stage and guided Jonathan up the stairs. When Jonathan got onto the stage, he shook hands with Abutalon. He then sighed and took his spot against the wall behind Abutalon. Abutalon then announced Rhea and Jonathan as this year's tributes from District 8. The tributes were then escorted into the backstage area to be visited by their friends and family. In Rhea's room, Rhea was visited by her parents, Chanel and Bobbin. Chanel immediately pulled Rhea into a hug and cried. She didn't want to say goodbye to her daughter and only child. Meanwhile, Bobbin tried his best to think of some information that could be useful. The information Bobbin gave was known to be surprisingly effective. After a few minutes of this, Bobbin and Chanel were escorted out of the room and Rhea was escorted into the train. Meanwhile, in Jonathan's room, Jonathan was visited by his older sister, 27-year-old Chantilly. Chantilly immediately hugged her little brother, not wanting to let go. Jonathan was the only family Chantilly had left. She didn't want him to die in these games. Chantilly also went on to give advice to Jonathan to the best of her knowledge. After a while of this, Chantilly was escorted out of the room and Jonathan was escorted onto the train. On the train, Rhea gave Jonathan a side-eye with her arms crossed. She didn't want to be here, and she sure as hell didn't want to be held back by her district partner. Jonathan noticed the glaring, but he wasn't sure what to do about this. Eventually, Kitten Scarlet walked into the main compartment of the train. When Kitten Scarlet entered, Rhea immediately got up and ended up being the one to drag Scarlet elsewhere. She didn't want Jonathan to hear what they discussed. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Kit stayed in the main compartment. Jonathan had a hard time understanding Kit due to Kit having lost his voice almost completely due to him being so old. Meanwhile, Rhea led the conversation with Scarlet, saying that she wasn't going to ally with Jonathan. This caught Scarlet off guard, as she thought Rhea would gladly ally with Jonathan. But, in reality, Rhea had a plan to make an all-girls alliance. Eventually, Scarlet forced Rhea back into the main train compartment to eat some dinner. While eating, Rhea lashed out after Jonathan commented on Rhea's rudeness. scratching Jonathan's face before being forced away from the dinner table by Scarlett as Kit checked on Jonathan. The next day, Rhea went into the main train compartment to see that all that was left on Jonathan after last night was a gnarly scar on Jonathan's cheek over his eye. As Rhea glared at Jonathan, he was given an eye patch to cover the scar by Scarlett. After this, Rhea stormed out of the train compartment. It is unknown why Rhea hated Jonathan so much, but it was clear that things were only going to get worse if they weren't separated. Eventually, the group all grouped together with Kit and Scarlett separating their tributes from each other on the couch. Scarlett then turned on the TV and the reapings for District 1 were live. In District 1, Abutalon had dinner with the mayor, his daughter Velverine Vuitton, 62-year-old Beryl Muscovy, and 23-year-old Gleam Backrock. After the dinner, the mayor and Velverine escorted Abutalon to the stage. Once on the stage, Abutalon walked over to the female raping bull and looked back at Velverine. One thing that's important to mention is that Velverine was in a wheelchair. The Hunger Games has never been known for being very wheelchair accessible, but after the accident, the mayor had ramps installed to get his daughter to and from the stage. Abutalon smiled and looked back at the female reaping bull. He then reached into the bowl. He swirled his hand around in the bowl for a little while to build suspense before picking out a piece of paper and jumping a little in surprise, reading out the name of 18-year-old Velverine Vuitton. Abutalon picking Velverine's name was oddly reminiscent of when Durian picked out the name of the mayor's daughter in District 9, back during the reapings of the 176th Hunger Games. When Velverine heard her name, she too was surprised. Velverine wasn't expecting to be picked this year, especially so close to the day of the accident that put her in a wheelchair occurred. Velverine would have to accept the fact that she was reaped eventually, but she is having a hard time doing so at that time. As Alumo heard his name, he immediately called out his twin sister Alumo. Hold on. Okay. Even though she was having a hard time accepting the fact she was reaped, she managed to overcome her fear, and she flipped her dark brunette hair over her shoulder before starting to roll forward in her wheelchair. She would then shake Abutalon's hand and take her spot against the wall. Abutalon then tearfully walked over to the male reaping bull and put his hand in the bowl. He swirled his hand around in the bowl for a little while and then picked out a piece of paper. He then read out the name of 17-year-old Alumo Bates. Don't know why I skipped those two slides, but there you go, just went over them. That is... Oh my gosh! Alumo's... Oh my gosh! Just freaking do the right things. Wait, was it? Oh my gosh, I did it. As Alumo heard his name, he immediately called out for his twin sister Alumo. This call garnered a scream from the female enclosure as Alumo tried to run out of it. Although peacekeepers were able to force her back into her spot without much fuss, the damage had already been done to the pair's reputation. In the capital, the pair were seen as unprofessional and bloodbath kills, according to the newly appointed commentator, then 25-year-old Benji Triton. Eventually, Alumo stepped out into the aisle with anger written all over his face. It was also revealed when he stepped out that the button-up shirt he was wearing was completely unbuttoned to show off his six-pack and a skull tattoo on his chest. This immediately caused Benji to change his opinion on the boy, saying that if he could resist the pain of getting a tattoo, he could possibly go far. As Alumo stepped up on the stage, he noticed people staring, but he paid no mind. Alumo simply glared at Abutilon before shaking his hand. Alumo then let out a dramatic sigh and took his place against the wall behind Abutilon. Abutilon then announced Velverine and Alumo as this year's tributes for District 1, to the sound of applause and cheering, along with some crying from Alumo. As the tributes were taken backstage, however, the head peacekeeper of the district decided to make an example of Alumo, which in turn ended up hurting Velverine. Instead of being escorted to back rooms to be visited by their family and friends, both of the tributes and their mentors were immediately taken to the train, although it did take a few minutes for 4 peacekeepers to lift Velverine into the train. On the train, Velverine yelled at Alumo. Velverine argued that if Alumo and his twin sister hadn't done anything at the Reapings and just let it happen, they would have been able to see their families, including Alumo getting to see Alumo. Alumo didn't listen, though, and instead glared out of the window until their mentors, Beryl and Gleam, came into the main compartment of the train. Beryl was getting tired of not getting any victories. Meanwhile, Gleam was still on her high horse after her victory 7 years ago. This definitely showed in the way they mentored Alumo and Velverine, as Beryl immediately started talking strategy and skill sets with Alumo, while Gleam started by exchanging friendly pleasantries with Velverine. It was obvious to the peacekeepers and Avoxes in the train that Alumo might have the burden of mentoring Velverine correctly if Gleam kept going this route. As Gleam continued to talk to Velverine as if they were good friends catching up, and not as if Velverine was going into the Hunger Games, even Alumo and Beryl noticed that they'd probably have to take on extra mentoring duties. As the train continued on, Beryl forced Gleam to take Velverine into the TV room with him and Alumo, in order for the entire group to talk strategy. This plan actually worked, as it brought Gleam to a more professional mindset when the group watched the previous Hunger Games. Gleam then initiated the conversation by asking what the District 1 tributes did wrong in these games, to which Velverine replied that they got blown up by a bunch of pussy-ass outliers. This comment even made the angry and thus far cynical Alumo laugh a little bit. After watching a few more past games, Alumo actually felt a lot better. Alumo was talkative and had a slight smile on his face. It was almost as if he forgot he was going into the games. Velverine also seemed to be having these same effects. When the District 8 train arrived in the capital, Kit and Scarlet were the first to step out of the train. Capital citizens were not as excited to see Jonathan as they were to see Amaya from District 11, considering they already knew pretty much what to expect from the tributes with Down syndrome, but as Kit and Scarlet announced the arrival of Jonathan and Rhea, the crowd of Capitalites erupted into cheers and applause. As Jonathan exited the train, excited Capitalites still swarmed him. Although this proved to be too much for Jonathan later, he took the Capital's excitement like a champ. He let Capitalites take pictures with him and even played with some kids. Meanwhile, Rhea was happy to be receiving all this attention. Rhea let Capitalites take pictures with her, even going as far as to strike seductive poses in a few pictures. She would also end up giving a capital boy her bra and giving a capital girl her phone number. After a little while this, Kit and Scarlet finally grabbed the pair and took them to the accommodation tower. Kit and Scarlet still tried to keep the pair separated though, so as to not cause more drama between them. Meanwhile, when the District 1 train arrived in the capital, Capitalites swarmed the train to get a look at Alumo specifically. When Beryl and Gleam exited the cart, they looked a bit worried as they didn't know how long it would take the Peacekeepers to get Wolverine off of the train. But when they announced the arrival of Alumo and Wolverine, the Peacekeepers actually found it easier to remove her from the train. As the tributes exited the train, not a lot of people swarmed Wolverine so as to not knock her over. Wolverine did end up signing autographs for other people in wheelchairs, as well as taking pictures with a few people who she had let get on her lap. Meanwhile, Alumo was swarmed by Capital girls who wanted to see his muscles. When this occurred, Alumo looked at Beryl and as if asking what to do before removing his shirt and flexing his muscles for the girls who had swarmed him. After a little while of this, Alumo and Wolverine were taken to the accommodation tower by Beryl and Gleam. As Alumo drove to the tower, the group continued to chat about strategy. When Rhea and Jonathan arrived in their room of the accommodation tower, they were immediately met by their stylist, Aerolise Flickerman. Aerolise was a surprisingly young stylist, being only 15 years old. Aerolise became a stylist just last year, though, through her talented eye for fashion. Aerolise immediately started to talk about what she was going to have the tributes wear for the parade. She told the pair she was going to put them in matching red outfits, which, when the tributes put their hands up together, would send lengths and lengths of red fabric dramatically flowing behind them. Jonathan was immediately on board with this idea. Meanwhile, Rhea was pissed off, not even wanting to be seen in the parade with Jonathan. This led to a massive argument between Rhea, Jonathan, and Aerolise. This argument resulted in Rhea ultimately agreeing out of annoyance. Aerolise then smiled and got to work. Her team got the measurements of Rhea, as Aerolise didn't even want to touch her. Meanwhile, Aerolise herself got the measurements of Jonathan. After getting their measurements, Aerolise and her team left to get the costumes done. Meanwhile, in the District 1 room, Wolverine managed to get into the room relatively easily due to the elevator. Meanwhile, Alumo looked around the room with a smile. Eventually, their stylist, Everest Green, came into the room. He was excited to work with the first ever wheelchair tribute. Meanwhile, Everest's team really wanted to work with Alumo. Everest did explain that he was going to be dressing them in an outfit that combined fashion aesthetics from Greece, India, Italy, and other ancient countries. Although there wasn't an argument in this room, it was still quite interesting as Alumo flirted with the female members of Everest's stylist team. Meanwhile, there were some issues getting Wolverine's measurement due to the wheelchair. After successfully getting the pair's measurements, Everest and his team left to get started on the outfits. In the tunnels, Alumo and Wolverine met up with the other couriers. Immediately, a friendship, or maybe something more, was clearly starting to form between Alumo and Dawson from 12. Alumo clearly made Dawson nervous in the best way possible. It also appeared that the feeling was mutual. Meanwhile, Velverine got super close with Aurelio from 2, Augusta from 2, Clay from 4, Coco from 7, and Houston from 10. One thing that the entire group saw, however, was the way that Rhea was bullying her district partner. The careers did not like her treatment of Jonathan at all. Meanwhile, Rhea continued to ignore Jonathan on purpose. She eventually went over to the District 6 chariot, where Columbia from 6 was talking with Despina from 5 and Amaya from 11. Rhea pretty much immediately inserted herself into the conversation. This action annoyed the girls, but they let her speak. Rhea brought up the fact that only 3 girls have won so far, and that they needed to get another female victor. Although they didn't like Rhea, the other girls couldn't really argue against her logic. The trio of girls also had noticed Rhea bullying her district partner, and so Despina gestured to Amaya and asked, "What about her?" Rhea would look at Amaya for a second before stating that Amaya was related to a victor, and thus could be a good addition to the alliance. The trio rolled their eyes before all agreeing to the alliance with Rhea, agreeing that another female victor was needed. When the chariots were called out to the tunnels, all the tributes rushed back to their chariots and got ready to perform well in front of the capital citizens. As the District 1 chariot left the tunnel, Capitolites were in awe of the beautiful design crafted meticulously by the amazing Everest Green. Velverine and Illumo happily waved to the crowd of Capitolites who gathered in the stand. Illumo then grabbed Velverine's hand and lifted it up into the sky. The pair had definitely grown to be proud of the fact they were representing their district. Meanwhile, when the District 8 chariot left the tunnels, Rhea glared at Jonathan the whole time. Even after Jonathan lifted his hands into the sky, causing the lengths of fabric to flow behind him, Rhea didn't stop her intense gaze. As the parade continued, Benji and Katie Flickerman talked about the tributes and which outfits they liked the most. Like the other years they've served in the past. After the chariots went back to the tunnel, Rhea was angry that she didn't win this year's Best Dressed Tributes, not really caring about the fact that Jonathan also lost it. In her mind, it was Jonathan's fault they lost this year's Best Dressed Tributes for being the way he was. Meanwhile, the other careers went over to the District 12 chariot and congratulated Dawson and Chance from 12 on winning this year's Best Dressed Tributes. Of course, the District 12 outfits weren't as iconic as the Girl on Fire from the 74th, 75th, and 76th Hunger Games, but Dawson and Chance rocked their nurses' outfits. On the first day of training, Rhea met up with Despina, Columbia, and Amaya. This trio suggested that they add more members to their alliance, to which Rhea agreed. The group then started to roam the training center. As the girls roamed around, Jonathan was left on his own. Jonathan looked around, not knowing what to do at all. Soon, the careers approached him. Jonathan looked around frantically to find an excuse not to communicate with the terrifying careers. Just then, Illumo stepped forward, followed by Velverine in her wheelchair. To the surprise of Jonathan, Illumo actually asked Jonathan if he wanted to join the Career Alliance. Velverine then added that they saw how Rhea was treating him, and that Jonathan shouldn't be going through that just because of his syndrome. Dawson also added that she wouldn't mind helping Jonathan train in combat, to which all the other careers agreed. This actually made Jonathan feel a bit better, and he actually agreed to join the careers. After this, the careers roamed around the training center. Along the way, Illumo, Velverine, Aurelia, and Augusta helped Jonathan train in weaponry. Clay from 4 and Isabella from 4 taught Jonathan how to fish. Camphor from 7 and Coco taught him how to tell toxic plants from non-toxic ones. Houston and Baja from 10 taught him how to tell dangerous mutts from ones that aren't dangerous. Finally, Chance and Dawson taught him how to use medical equipment and to heal wounds. Meanwhile, the girls finally found another girl willing to join the alliance. This girl was Winnow from 9, who had been talking with the girl from 3. Once the girls approached the pair, the girl from 3 ran off, leaving just Winnow there to talk to the group. Immediately, Rhea invited Winnow to join the alliance. Columbia added that they needed to bring another female victor to the Hunger Games. After Columbia added that, Winnow immediately agreed. She didn't really like Rhea, but what Columbia said enticed her. The girls then went and roamed around the training center. Winnow and Amaya trained with sickles, Despina and Columbia trained with scythes, and Rhea trained with a sword. As Rhea trained, she tried her best to only do attacks when Jonathan was looking in an attempt to scare him. Eventually, Rhea would realize that she wasn't scaring Jonathan at all. The fact she wasn't scaring Jonathan pissed Rhea off even further. She then unleashed her rage all over the dummies in the sword training area, slashing them all into small pieces. During training evaluations, Alumo showed off his skills with a sword, twirling it above his head. He then threw the sword at a target and hit the target directly in the bullseye. Alumo's immense skill gained him a training score of 10. Meanwhile, Valverine showed her skill with a bow and arrow. She shot at 12 different targets, hitting 11 in the bullseye, and missing the bullseye by only a few inches on the final one. This skill gained Valverine a score of 11 to match how many targets she hit. During Jonathan's turn, he showed off his new skill with telling toxic plants from non-toxic ones. He effortlessly guessed every single one correctly. Although this skill was known to be quite boring, Jonathan still gained a score of 6. Finally, when it was Rhea's turn, she walked into the training area and showed off her skill with swords. Although she showed immense skill with the sword, the game makers didn't like how Rhea was treating her district partner, and they said this to Rhea and wished her luck before she left. Rhea then ended up scoring a training score of 4, which pissed her off when she saw it, and she stormed off into her room, slamming the door. Other notable training scores included Augusta from 2 with a 9, Aurelio from 2 with an 11, Clay from 4 with an 8, and Dawson from 12 with an 11. The mentors of the high scorers were naturally proud of their tributes. Meanwhile, the mentors of the low scorers were naturally disappointed in their tributes. This was especially true for Scarlet, as she immediately knew why Rhea had gotten the low score she got. On the night of the interviews, fear flowed through the hearts of some tributes, especially Jonathan and Amaya. Neither of them liked to talk all that much, but they were more scared because they had an alliance to impress now. Up first was Valverine. She had to get peacekeepers to help her up onto the interview stage. Valverine was wearing a beautiful red dress with gold accents. This newly appointed interviewer, Tia Flickerman, complimented Valverine on the dress before taking a seat. Valverine's questions were more targeted towards how she was going to win with such a weakness as her wheelchair. Valverine answered these questions by stating that Alumo had agreed to help her off of her podium with Jonathan and Camphor, while the other careers grabbed weapons for the 4 of them once they're able to join the battle. Most of her answers caused the Capitol crowd to cheer for her and hope for her victory. After one final question, Wolverine smiled at the crowd and bowed to the best of her ability before rolling to the end of the stage and being held down by peacekeepers. Meanwhile, Aluma was walking up onto the stage, and he smiled at the other careers before shaking hands with Tia and sitting down. Aluma was in a red suit with gold accents in order to match Wolverine's dress. Before asking her first question, Tia complimented Aluma's suit, which garnered a compliment from Aluma about Tia's dress. This compliment caused Tia to blush slightly before continuing with the interview. As Tia asked questions more targeted towards how he would win, Aluma constantly received compliments from Tia on anything ranging from the suit to the muscles to the eyes. This only caused Aluma to compliment Tia even more, causing her to blush even more. Before getting off the stage, Aluma kissed Tia on the cheek and said that if he won, he was gonna make her his, making Tia blush more than she had all show, and caused the Capitolites in the crowd to cheer loudly as Aluma left the stage. During Rhea's turn, she received jeers from the crowd. No one liked her, not even Tia, but Tia had to be the professional one. Tia welcomed Rhea onto the stage and shook her hand before sitting down. Rhea's questions were targeted towards how she'd win at first, but eventually Rhea's questions would turn to why she hated Jonathan so much. It was here that Rhea's ableist tendencies really showed through. It was at this point that Rhea also stated that she was forced to let Amaya join her alliance, which angered everyone backstage. This revealed that not only was Rhea ableist, but also slightly racist. This definitely caused outrage everywhere in Panem, not just the capital. This was also when Tia had enough and kicked Rhea off the stage. During Jonathan's turn, he received cheers, which made him feel a little better. As he walked onto the stage, his basic black and white suit garnered cheers as well. Jonathan did forget to shake Tia's hand, but she didn't take it personally and just sat down across from Jonathan, starting off his interview with a compliment. Jonathan's questions were more targeted towards how he dealt with Rhea and her ableism for as long as he did. Jonathan just answered this by stating that she wasn't the only person in District 8 to hate him for being different. This caused even more anger in the Capitol crowd as Jonathan looked down at his lap. Jonathan's interview didn't last much longer as Jonathan started giving less impressive answers after that. As Jonathan left the stage, Rhea grabbed him and pinned him up against the wall. She yelled in his face before punching him in the face and stating that he was first on her list. After that occurred, the other careers went to Jonathan and immediately asked if he was okay. They all seemed genuinely worried. Even Despina and Columbia came to check on him. Winnow also came as soon as her interview was done, having also seen what had occurred. The next day, the tributes were split into 4 separate hovercrafts. And Hovercraft 1 was Alumo from 1, the girl from 3, Isabella from 4, Despina from 5, Houston from 10, and Dawson from 12. And Hovercraft 2 was Wolverine from 1, Aurelio from 2, the boy from 3, Clay from 4, the boy from 6, and Chance from 12. And Hovercraft 3 was Augusta from 2, The Boy from 5, Columbia from 6, Coco from 7, Jonathan from 8, and Winnow from 9. Finally, in Hovercraft 4 was Camphor from 7, Rhea from 8, The Boy from 9, Baja from 10, Amaya from 11, and The Boy from 11. In Hovercraft 1, Aluma looked around and saw 3 of his allies, Isabella, Houston, and Dawson. Dawson was avoiding Alumo's gaze a little though. Things were a bit awkward between the pairs since the interviews when Alumo heavily flirted with the interviewer and Dawson admitted to having feelings for Alumo during her interview. When Alumo saw the sad look on Dawson's face, he felt terrible about what had happened the previous night. Alumo tried to get Dawson's attention the entire ride to the arena, but to no avail. Eventually, Meanwhile, Isabella and Houston talked with each other about how awkward things were with Alumo and Dawson. It made them sad, especially because Isabella and Houston were the ones who shipped Alumo and Dawson together the most. In Hovercraft 2, Wolverine saw 3 of her allies as well, Aurelio, Clay, and Chance. Wolverine also noticed that she was the only girl in the hovercraft with a group of 5 men. All 5 of the boys in the hovercraft were caught staring at Wolverine a couple times. Wolverine was caught a bit off guard, especially by Chance, considering she had a small crush on him after the tribute parade. Wolverine eventually commented to Chance that his sister might get a little jealous after Chance successfully gets with her, considering his sister's crush on Alumo. In Hovercraft 3, Jonathan saw 2 of his allies, Augusta and Coco. He also saw 2 of his enemies, Columbia and Winnow. Jonathan was sat right in between Winnow and Columbia. The pair asked Jonathan if he was feeling better since last night, to which Jonathan replied that he was feeling a little better. Jonathan then looked across the aisle at Augusta and Coco, who were glaring at Columbia and Winnow. In their opinion, being associated with the ableist was just as bad as being the ableist, even if Amaya was with her too. Finally, in Hovercraft 4, Rhea saw 1 of her allies, Amaya. She also saw 2 of her enemies, Camphor and Baja. Rhea glared at everyone in the hovercraft, not even speaking. Last night, she had been caught by kids trying to sneak into Jonathan's room and murder him. She was pissed off that her plans failed. She glared the most at Amaya, her supposed ally. Although they were in an alliance together, Rhea couldn't wait to kill Amaya. Meanwhile, Amaya saw Rhea's intense glare and it kinda scared her. When the hovercrafts arrived in the arena, the tributes were escorted into their launch rooms. In Wolverine's launch room, Wolverine was looking around frantically until Gleam came into the room. Gleam walked over to Wolverine and gave her a hug. Gleam then stated that she was proud of how far Wolverine had come since the beginning. Wolverine smiled at this and started to roll her wheelchair towards her tube and got into it. In Alumo's launch room, Alumo was pacing back and forth in his launch room, seeing the prisoner uniform as the arena uniform. He had no idea if this was to symbolize the arena or if it was just to make the tributes look stupid. As he looked more in depth at the outfit, Beryl came into the room. As soon as Beryl came into the room, he hugged Alumo and stated that Alumo had what it took to become victorious. He just had to use it right. Alumo then got into the arena outfit and got into the tube and watched the glass close around him. In Rhea's lunchroom, she was surprised when Scarlet never showed up. During an interview with Scarlet after the games, she revealed that she was scared to even set foot in there considering her very crazy behavior towards Jonathan. Eventually, Rhea got into the arena clothing and got into her tube and watched the glass close around her. In Jonathan's lunchroom, Scarlet came in. She then revealed what had happened last night. Everything from when Rhea left her room, to when she grabbed the knife, to when she was caught by Kit, to when she killed Kit before putting the knife away and going back to bed. This scared Jonathan and his heart skipped a beat. Scarlet hugged Jonathan, telling him that everything was going to be okay. She then helped Jonathan into the tube, and Jonathan watched as the glass closed around him. As this occurred, Jonathan put his hand against the glass with tears in his eyes. When the podiums rose into the arena, the tributes noticed they were just outside of a famous prison in the old world known as Alcatraz. The cornucopia was situated on a dock. This dock is where prisoners were taken onto the island. Another thing the tributes noticed is that this year, firearms were available as weapons within the cornucopia. As Alumo looked around, he saw that the back wall of the cornucopia was lined with pistols, AK-47s, miniguns, and SMGs. Alumo decided to signal to Clay to grab an AK for him. Meanwhile, Camphor signaled for Coco to grab him a throwing axe, and Wolverine signaled to Isabella to grab her a sword. These signals were met with nods. As for Jonathan, he looked at the center and thought for a moment. He then signaled for Dawson to grab him a sword as well. Dawson smiled and nodded at Jonathan, preparing to run in. Meanwhile, Rhea stood on her podium, glaring at the cornucopia. She was ready to get the closest weapon to her and kill off Jonathan. When the gong sounded, Rhea ran into the cornucopia. Since there were only two swords, Rhea grabbed one while Isabella managed to snag the other. Meanwhile, Jonathan, Camphor, and Alumo all ran over to Wolverine's podium and started to lift the wheelchair down from the podium. While Jonathan was preoccupied with the wheelchair, Rhea snuck up behind him and decapitated him before running off. As Alumo saw this, Clay gave him the AK. Alumo then shot towards Rhea, but she was too prepared. She grabbed Amaya and used her as a human shield, putting her in the way of the bullet. This move caused outrage everywhere, as both tributes with Down syndrome were pretty much killed by Rhea. As Alumo saw what Rhea did, he stumbled backwards. This caused him to let go of Wolverine's wheelchair, and it fell down on top of Camphor. Although Clay and Isabella were able to help get Wolverine off of Camphor, they couldn't help but call out the fact that Alumo looked utterly terrified by what he had just done. As Houston and Dawson finished off the boy from 6, they saw Alumo on the ground and looked between each other. The pair then slowly approached Alumo and the other careers. The pair helped Alumo up off the ground, although it did take some convincing and some help from Aurelio and Augusta. Eventually, Coco gave Camphor the throwing axe after needing to use it to take down the girl from 3. Isabella also gave Wolverine the sword she had snagged. Eventually, after finishing off the boy from 3 and the boy from 5, Baja and Chance also united with the other careers. After the bloodbath cannons rang out, Alumo still looked mentally scarred from killing Amaya. He constantly repeated himself, asking what he had done, rocking back and forth as he did so. This definitely worried the other careers, and eventually Dawson hugged Alumo. At that point, Alumo burst into tears, returning the hug. Meanwhile, Rhea reunited with Despina, Columbia, and Winnow. She then stated that Amaya was dead. Immediately, the other girls thought that something was off. Not only was Rhea covered in blood, but she hated people like Amaya and Jonathan. Meanwhile, the careers had finally gotten Alumo to calm down. He still hated what he had done to Amaya, but at least he wasn't rambling incoherently while rocking back and forth anymore. After calming Alumo, Chance and Dawson asked Alumo if he wanted to help them find the girls. This surprisingly brought a smile to Alumo's face. He said that he'd gladly join them and grabbed his AK. Chance and Dawson smiled between each other before leaving the rest of the careers with Alumo. Unbeknownst to Alumo, Chance, and Dawson, the boy from 9 and the boy from 11 were right nearby to their camp in the direction that the trio was heading. As the trio was passing by their location, the boy from 11 jumped out and got on Chance's back. Dawson easily stabbed the boy in the back, and the boy from 9 also jumped out. He got on Dawson's back and wouldn't let go, but it was still an easy kill for Alumo. After the trio easily killed the duo of outliers, Alumo, Chance, and Dawson continued searching for the girls. Meanwhile, the girls had the same idea and were searching for the careers. Rhea led the way to where she thought the other careers were. Just as she thought, the careers were still at the cornucopia, although it did worry her that Alumo, Chance, and Dawson weren't there. Before any more thinking could be done, however, Winnow jumped out from their hiding spot and tackled Baja to the ground. Winnow then stabbed Baja multiple times until her cannon sounded. At this point, Velverine, Augusta, Aurelio, Isabella, and Clay had run away from the fight to try to find Alumo, Chance, and Dawson for assistance. This left Coco, Camphor, and Houston left alive in the cornucopia to fight. After the death of his girlfriend Baja, Houston ran at Winnow and easily decapitated her. At that point, Camphor and Coco officially joined the fight. Coco ran at Despina, thinking she was a weak enough opponent to take on, but as soon as Coco got on Despina's back, Despina fell backwards, immediately getting Coco off of her. She then pinned Coco to the ground and stabbed her in the neck before getting stabbed in the side herself. This stab was done by Camphor, who let Despina lay there bleeding out. Camphor then turned to Columbia, his rage still boiling over from the death of his sister. Camphor then ran at Columbia. Before he could even reach her, however, Columbia stuck out her spear and Camphor ran straight into it. He'd then fall right next to his sister as he watched her take her last breath, followed shortly by Despina, then himself. Their final opponent for now, Houston, was terrified of the girls. He never thought that a couple of outliers would be good enough to take down 4 members of the Career Alliance. It was obvious to Houston that what was about to happen, and he accepted his fate before ultimately getting stabbed in the neck by Rhea. After this fight, it was already down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Velverine from 1, Alumo from 1, Augusta from 2, Aurelio from 2, Isabella from 4, Clay from 4, Columbia from 6, Rhea from 8, Dawson from 12, and Chance from 12. At this point, all hell broke loose within the Career Alliance. The others hadn't found Alumo, Chance, and Dawson yet, so they had a chance. The first person to turn on the others was Velverine, slicing her sword through Clay's neck as he was pushing her wheelchair. As Isabella ran at Wolverine to avenge her brother, Augusta stepped in the way and stabbed Isabella in the gut. Even though she had been stabbed in the gut, she fought for a while, injuring Augusta pretty good before falling to the ground dead. Meanwhile, Illumo, Chance, and Dawson finally found what was left of the Girl Power Alliance. Before they could have time to react, however, Chance was pulled out of the bush and held at knife point by Columbia. This caused Illumo and Dawson to step out from the bush. Rhea begged for Columbia to kill the boy already, but she just couldn't. So, in a moment of unapologetic insanity, Rhea walked over to Chance and finished him off herself. Meanwhile, back with the other careers, Augusta was slowly dying due to her injuries, but they still roamed looking for Illumo, Chance, and Dawson. As the group finally found the trio, Augusta collapsed next to Illumo. Illumo looked down at Augusta, and she begged Illumo to put her out of her misery. As this is happening, Wolverine threw her sword into Columbia's neck, causing her to slowly bleed out. As Columbia slowly bled out, Aurelio tackled Wolverine out of her wheelchair. Meanwhile, Illumo finally gave in to what Augusta was begging him to do. He stabbed Augusta in the heart, instantly sounding her cannon. Just after Augusta's cannon, Columbia had finally bled out, sounding her cannon as well. As Illumo noticed what was happening to his district partner, Illumo ran over to the dead body of Columbia and took out the sword, throwing it to Wolverine. In one swift motion, Wolverine grabbed the sword and stabbed it into Aurelio's neck. As Aurelio's cannon sounded, Illumo saw Rhea sneaking up on Dawson. Before he could warn her, though, a sword was already sticking through her stomach. With a gasp, Dawson collapsed to the ground. Dawson then crawled over to Illumo. She, much like Augusta, begged Illumo to put her out of her misery. Illumo reluctantly did so, shooting Dawson in the heart, sounding her cannon. Now it was down to the top three: Wolverine from 1, Illumo from 1, and Rhea from 8. As soon as this was realized, Rhea ran at Wolverine, who was still on the ground unable to move. Rhea easily stabbed Wolverine in the heart multiple times until her cannon sounded. Rhea then got up and glared at Illumo intensely. Rhea then ran at Illumo. Illumo fired his weapon, but Rhea dodged the shot and tackled Illumo to the ground. At this point, Illumo thought it was over, but by some stroke of pure luck, he realized that Wolverine's sword was close enough for him to grab. As Rhea was making her victory speech, Illumo grabbed Wolverine's sword and plunged it into the side of Rhea's head. Rhea gasped as blood spilled from the wound in the side of her head. Rhea then asked, "What have you done?" to Illumo. Illumo then stated that he had saved Panem from an ableist prick being their victor. After stating this, Rhea's cannon sounded. After his victory was announced, Illumo then passed out. Peacekeepers and nurses rushed into the arena to bring Illumo to the hospital. At the hospital, it was determined that it would take too long for Illumo to recover for his victory interview, and so it was cancelled. After Illumo got out of the hospital, he returned home to District 1, where he moved into the Victor's Village with his family. Eventually, Illumo moved to the capital. Here, he would make his promise to Tia Flickerman become a reality. He asked Tia out on a date during the 5th anniversary of his victory. During the 10th anniversary, Illumo then proposed to Tia and they got married. Alumo and Tia had 5 kids together, 3 boys and 2 girls. One of their boys went on to be the last killed tribute in the later games. Another thing Alumo did after his victory was sign a petition to make the Hunger Games more wheelchair accessible. This would install ramps onto the reaping stages in the interview stage. It would make the elevators in the tribute accommodation tower bigger so as to fit more wheelchairs in it at once. It would also install ramps that could be activated by the game makers that are attached to the podiums. At the end of the day, Alumo made a lot of changes for the better. Alright, tributes. So that is the end of the 5th episode of Ashes of the Hunger Games, where we went over the 185th Hunger Games. In the next video, we will be going over the 186th through 189th Hunger Games. And we will just be doing that. That's what we'll be doing. So, yeah. Just like normal, I'm gonna show, like, the posters that I had made for fun for the tributes. Just like last time, it'll be the POV tributes and the tributes that we're allied with. So, there's a lot more posters this time around, because there's a lot more tributes that are mentioned in alliances with our tributes, with our POV tributes. There's a lot more of that, and there's one less district that's a POV district, because last time District X was a thing, and so there were 13 districts competing, but now there's only 12, so, yeah, but I mean, District X and District 12, really, those two were the POV districts last time, and they were already allied, and then there were, like, there weren't as many allies of theirs, as there were with Alumo and Velverine and Rhea and Jonathan. Also, these games are canonically short. I didn't write them bad, like, on accident. This was written short and probably bad because it's canonically short. And I mentioned that in the next video. I mentioned some sort of story point in the next video about that. So, because I've already started writing the next episode, I already have the 186 games written. So, yeah, I already have the first games written for the next episode. I just have to finish writing the other 3, then I can post that one. But yeah, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, then slap that like button. As always, stay awesome. Good. Bye, everybody.